Okay, no jokes. Chuck's already laughing, so that's a kind of good intro there. Well, the avocado industry is also my favorite industry, and it's interesting enough to where I left the University of California where I could become a full-time employee in that industry. But while with the university, I'd studied various aspects of especially the Hass avocado, and we'd learned a long time ago about the A flower and the B flower types, which one opens up in the morning, which one opens up female in the afternoon. And so we had this information, and it wasn't, I guess probably as long as, I don't know, Scott, at least 10 years ago, Scott Scarborough said, well, I guess Mission Produce, just to throw out names, actually held a field meeting and said, here are people who are vending Zutano pollen, and they feel very sure that it increased the production. And enough of the people who were there at that meeting says, yeah, we, through either Matt or Mark, had it applied, and they're very sure that it increased production. But it goes back to the university system, which says, can you prove it? And how many replications did you have? An individual avocado tree, by the way, the variability, even the Hass avocado, it's 50-1, that if you were to have individual tree replications in a research plot, you would need to have 50 replications, because that's how variable it is that you can say, is that data valid? So with that understanding, and certainly the university background, you want to be able to know that it's been tested, that it's been replicated to where when it is statistically analyzed, if it comes out, then you know that you've got something that you can hang your hat on. So my experience goes back when I was with the university. I was actually in Orange County first, and I was observing an avocado grove in San Juan Capistrano, and just happened that, okay, here were Fuertes, and it was still the main variety. And beyond, further into the grove, were Hass avocados. And I was looking at the Fuertes, and I was waiting on the grower actually to show up, and I walked beyond the Fuertes, through the Fuertes, and up into the Hass. And boy, the Fuertes had a decent crop on them. And I walk into the first rows of Hass, and they're just loaded. And I said, okay, well, this is a good crop year, as we can have. And so I kept walking deeper into the Hass and noticed there was a regression of production, less and less production. And okay, I'm thinking A-type, B-type. We have the 40 out there in front, and then we have the A with further back. So it's just an indication. Then later, as I became commercially involved in avocado production in Temecula, we still had 4 varieties, and some dingbat farm advisor back probably 40 years ago said, well, if you're going to plant out a new orchard, and I was, I gave that away, but Kaiser was saying, well, what would be a good planting mix of varieties? And so I came up with a 50% Hass, 25% Zutano, 25% bacon. And I said, well, if nothing else, you're going to have some good pollinizers in here, as we understand, maybe, but the thing was they were still commercial varieties at that time. So as you'll still see, some of the groves still have plenty of Zutanos and bacons, especially in the cold areas. And I think a lot of us have seen the benefit of those trees in the area if you're right next to, especially the Hass trees, and right over here is some Zutanos or bacon. So I'd asked Dr. Mike Clegg, after I'd noticed within a commercial grove that here were some Fuertes and the bulk of the trees are Hass, and I walked again to the Hass closest to the Fuertes, and just really good production. I walked beyond it and saw again this regression of how much fruit was on the tree. So I asked Dr. Clegg to do an experiment with it. Set it up the way that pretty much you would actually have Hass next to Zootanos, Hass next to Bacons, Hass next to Fuertes, at least those three. And of course you'd have your control trial, which would be no pollinizers, just all Hass. And he agreed to do that. I'm not sure how many, who can raise their hands and say that they read or certainly heard about Dr. Clegg's results from this? Tom Shea, very good, Andy. It was positive, and yet it still wasn't out there, geez, you ought to do this, definitely ought to have some. And what was I have to say from his results, the number one variety was Fuerte. 4 years of gathering data, the Zootano was the best the first 3 years. And what happened was, the fourth year, that Fuerte bloomed, and its bloom overlapped the Hass bloom. And I think that's the biggest thing about the bee types, most of our bee types, is that they don't overlap the Hass bloom, as well as what happened this last year with Dr. Clegg's trial, that it had 4 times the production of the other cross-pollinators. And so his data had to show this, that hey, out of 4 years, you take the average even with the average, all those lousier years, and it was so big for the Fuertes that fourth year that it came out that the Fuerte was the best pollinizer. Since then, I wasn't sure just who the people were or the company, but they were talking to packing houses and saying, we're gathering Zootano pollen, and we understand that this is a good pollinizer, and enough other people have used it that we feel very sure it has validity. And I was asked to come down to Calavo Pack House and see what I thought about that. And I said, well, you need to contact Carol Lovett, Dr. Lovett of UC Riverside, and see if she will at least, and she was the one person I know that can really do this, where you would take the ovule and you would take a pollen grain and just put it right there, and you're looking at it through a microscope and actually see the pollen tube germinate, and fecundate the Hass flower. Well, they didn't do it. And so I couldn't ever say this works. I said, till you actually do some actual research, get a good researcher to do it, it's not going to work. Well, now, the Production Research Committee for California Avocado Commission was always entertaining applications for research grants. And about 4 years ago, an application for Zootano pollen research was submitted, and it was turned down. And as you know, if we get 50 different applications for different trials as an industry, you can't just do all of them. And in fact, we usually get it down to where, if it's 6 to 10 trials that are being researched and grants being given, that you just can't do them all. So Zootano pollen is just kind of sitting out there, and submitted the trial or the application for research to the society. It was turned down, and by the research committee. The Avocado Society, I'm on the board, they asked what I thought about the applications that weren't funded. And we evaluated all those, and I said, well, the one that is the cheapest, that has the greatest potential in my mind, would be this one right here, that it's a Zootano pollination trial on Hass. And so if you want to fund something, go ahead and do that. Well, there were no set up to do the trial herself, and somewhere I knew I'd already been working with Matt and Mark, out there seeing if you put up the Zootano pollen out there, did you really get the fruit set? Well, it still wasn't on the basis of being a good replicated trial. So that was where I wanted to know on my own basis, because I saw enough of it that it definitely was working, so I did the trial for the university. So I did some handouts. If you don't have one of these that, well, what are your results? I said, well, they're positive, and I sent her the results. So this sheet here with my letterhead on it has the results of the 4 different sites. I'll get some water, excuse me. Now these are regarding only Zootono pollen over Hass. One of the other aspects of pollination is knowing that the flower that you're hoping to fertilize is in its prime condition to receive the pollen. And Dr. Berg a long time ago mentioned that, you want to have at least a 60-degree mean temperature if you're going to get good pollination. Mean temperature being like if it's 50-degree night, your coldest temperature being 50, and 70 being your high temperature of the day, the mean temperature 60. Over time, I kind of got thinking that 65 is better because of observing the Hass flowers as to when do they open. And again, I'd refer back to Dr. Berg, and he is saying, the female Hass flower opens in the morning. Well, I didn't say what time in the morning, but in the morning. And I know when we were first getting out there and checking this out, we were waiting. I said, I'll just bring in Mark and Matt because they've done an awful lot of work on this, and I've worked with them, is that as guys, we don't want to be applying this until that pistil's shiny, when you look down on it. And the first day, I think, when we were all ready to do it, it was 1 o'clock before that ever happened. And, well, I think there was still some pollen applied, but now that I've been doing it myself, is that if you can end up having that 65-degree day, which would be a 55-degree low temperature and a 75-degree day temperature, you're going to have that 55 degrees. And it could be even higher than that, of course. You don't want to have a heat spell, of course. You don't want to be over 90 degrees. So that's one of my rules of thumb, is you don't want to be out there pollinizing in the heat of the day, but you do want to wait until that pistil's open, and you hope that it opens up somewhere before 11 o'clock, certainly before 12 o'clock. And if I'm walking around prior to actually applying the Zootono pollen the day before, I want to know what that maximum temperature is. So you have a minimum recording thermometer, and then have that, you take a look at it and say, okay, this is 80 degrees today, and then you have that, you kind of reset it, so then you set it out in a grove and you come back the next morning and see what the minimum temperature was. And geez, if that is around 60, or certainly at least 55, then you've actually going to have a good pollination day for that next day, or the day that you're out there now in the morning when you're looking at what was at low temperature, and you already had the information for what was a high temperature. And if that went ahead and came out to where you're like between 55 and 65, then you're going to have a good result from applying your pollen. When, again, now you're waiting simply to see when does that flower open up female. And again, if it's anywhere before noon, you're going to be okay. I like it if it's before 11, but that's ideal, and that means you don't have to be doing too much if you can absolutely wait for the perfect timing. So anywhere before noon that you're going to have a mean temperature from yesterday's low and today's high, that you'll be right there at the 65-degree mean temperature. So the Avocado Society says, which trial can we do? And the least expensive, but I thought the one most important to the industry, was a Zootono pollen trial. That my experience had just been that if something can increase your production, and it's just flat been shown, even if it's 10%, but if it happened at least all the time, you'd have at least a 10% if you did things right. With today's prices, let's say, you know, $1.50 a pound, that extra 10% could very well be giving you an extra $1,500 an acre. So the Zutano trial, I thought, was the one that was the best to get out, get done, and so all we needed was somebody to do it. Damn, me. So knowing where some trials were pretty good ones that I knew we could set up with. Palma Valley, as you look on the paper, Site 1 and Site 2, and it actually says how many trees I want to have, at least 100 trees per replication. I shouldn't say, no, not per replication. I wanted to, where am I on this? Yeah, we had 114 trees on the first site that didn't receive any pollen. And now I go quite a ways away, same Hass orchard, same age of trees and everything, and I get another 114 trees, mark it all off, and that block would receive Zutano pollen. So that's how it was set up. I had the markers on the corners, equal number of trees that were going to be the data trees. We didn't, believe me, I did not harvest and collected all the data per tree. I collected the data per replication of first trial's 114 tree blocks, second trial 140 trees per block, both for Zutano and no Zutano. The third one was 110 trees per block, treated and untreated. And the fourth site was 108 trees. There was only 106 trees that I could squeeze in there, so there's maybe a 1.25% variation, yeah.
What was your application then?
Where was it?
What did you do? How did you apply it?
Well, we'll get into that. I thought I would just go ahead and talk about the data first. Yeah, because that's very, very important. I guess talking about is to what time of the day do you apply it? It's not so much what time, it's that when does that flower open female, what time? And then, of course, what your high and low temperatures are. So the fourth trial had a little bit of a variation. Maybe that's why. But the results, trial number 1, was a 21% increase. What other trial has anybody done out there that can say, I did such and such, and I replicated enough to where it just wasn't one year or one spot, that you got a 21% increase? The second site, 37.5% increase. They're both in Palma Valley, and this again is the same owner, same age of trees, but I made sure that at least it was still within the treated blocks would be the same number of trees and the same age of trees. And so Harlan Beck was the cooperator on that, along with Westback Avocado. I'm just going to say it because they're the ones releasing it, let me do it also. The second site then, also Palma Valley, 140 trees per acre, 37.5% increase. And the interesting thing about that block, and the reason I chose it, was it was the poorest block, that we always get the least production out of that block, out of the 100 acres that we manage out there. So I'm going to just do it here. And that is why, I guess, that we got the 37.5, because there's a lowest producer. And now once we put on the Zutano pollen, compared to the rest of the orchard that didn't get Zutano pollen, it was at least as good as those. We have been applying Zutano pollen, and I had to make sure that we didn't apply the Zutano pollen over my treated areas, the test site areas. So made sure we stayed away from those. But this grove, at least the 100 acres that we manage, has been having Zutano pollen applied now for at least 3 years. And we're very happy with production. Like I say, the rest, that other 90 acres roughly, was not part of the trial. It's just that we're proving that it's worth the cost of buying the pollen, doing the dusting, and getting, in this case, if you put just those two blocks together, you end up having roughly a 30% increase as an average. So I wanted to, for the society and as valid results as possible. I had 2 more replications for a total of 4. So site 3 is over here in Temecula, and thought again I'd do it on my groves where I knew, okay, do we have good production? How variable is production? This kind of thing between these 2 sites. And so I knew that if we can get any increase in production, well, it'd be highly important because both these groves are fairly low producers on an average. And so site 3, as you look at that, 110 trees per treated site with no pollen. We got 5.5 bins out of the 110 trees. And with Zutano pollen, we got 8 bins, 45% increase. This is on the poorest producing orchards that I manage. And it's just one of those things where you got to smile. Knowing that it's valid, especially you get 4 replications in there and you get these kind of, if we were to have any one of these replications that was actually a negative, okay, you applied Zutano pollen, and that treatment that had the Zutano pollen, if it came back and had less production compared to the no Zutano pollen, well, now that is understandable within the variability of the Hass avocado, but no, every one of these replications was a positive increase. And when you get that, it is totally valid information. The 4th site with 105 trees, now it's 108 trees versus 106 trees. We got 5 bins with no pollen, and that's with the extra 2 trees, so that should be okay to have that 2-tree variability. And the one that received pollen, 106 trees, had 6 bins with a 20% increase. So 20% increase was the lowest increase we had. I don't know if we'll publish this or not. It'd probably take me to sit down and have to write it to get it into the Society's yearbook. It should be something, if nothing else, I hope that all of you are Society members, because the Avocado Commission, I guess, this year, for instance, doesn't have a production research budget. If somebody can say different than that, I'd like to hear it, because it'd be a positive, but it's not the case. Why? I don't know. It was voted by the board. No, we won't do that. So that's one of the reasons society had to come up with this and get some guy that had enough time, I guess, to do it. So I'm very happy to be able to share with you the results of this trial and verification of those people who had been observing, like Dr. Berg, 50 years ago, saying, we have these 2 different flower types, and you want to have pollination on the hash. You need a mean temperature at least 55 degrees. And thanks to those people, this trial was done. Any questions? Yes.
Lynn, can you get into how you applied the pollen?
Well, I used the only example I had, and it was the most strenuous application that you got to do, is to put the backpack sprayer on your back, and you buy the Zutano pollen, and you mix it with this nice white powder, which is sort of like a wetting adhesive type of a powder, and you mix that up according to how much you want to have. What are we doing? It's Matt, what is your application? 30 grams per tree or something like that? 30 grams per acre. What is your
20 grams per acre, but 60 total, but we try to do it in 3 applications. 2 or 3 applications.
Okay, that's you want to not just figure this is all going to happen if you only applied it one time. The bloom of the Hass avocado, as we know, can last 2.5 months. And every day, there's new flowers opening. Every day, the next day, those flowers are no good unless they were pollinated. So 3 applications is a good way, if nothing else, on a temperature basis, of knowing that you're trying to do the best you can with 3 applications, and at least 1 or 2 of those are going to have really come close to perfect. Yeah, Matt.
Was there any empirical data collected on when, what flush, meaning if it was the first kind of flush that came through, second or third?
You're the guy that's going to volunteer to do another trial like this and get that empirical stuff. I'm out there, I'm playing farmer. What I wanted to have is 4 replications in the fact, like I said. But that's a very good question, Mark. I just razzing you. But if you want to do something like that, I think the Avocado Commission might very well go ahead and want to do a retrial on something like this with some other varieties possibly even. But when we do have one that as an average comes up with a 25% increase.
Is there a harvesting method if you just have a few pollinizers that exist on your grove just to add to supplement maybe?
I'm just glad to hear you'd have some of these pollinizer trees in the grove. Right. And it would be, I think, if you were to go ahead and pick the trees right around it. And
What we do application method-wise is just a standard backpack blower.
Leaf blower, right?
Yeah.
Kind of call it leaf blower. So.
The carrier that Lynn was talking about my tendency is to go to a 1 to 4 ratio of pollen, 1 part carrier to 4 parts pollen. And what that does is the first time I ever applied pollen where it was all by itself it was virtually impossible to get it out of the bottle because it stuck to itself. But once I put the carrier in there, it evens the flow out, and it basically just looks like a talcum powder dust going out over the trees. So that's where the carrier becomes an essential part of it. And it basically walk in your grove, applying it where you want it to go. I mean, I like it. We've tried it a little bit by air, but
by
helicopter. But by doing so, you're limited to the days of application because the helicopter availability, the quality of the day, whether it's warm enough or not. But with the helicopter, the wind is another important factor. If you're applying it by air and it's a windy day, you might be applying it to your neighbor rather than your own. And actually, air or wind is an essential part of our application method because we get a better flow of the pollen over the tops of the trees when we get a good air, or maybe about 7 miles per hour, something like that. It works that much better when you get some kind of airflow.
So under canopy or over canopy, if you can get it slightly over canopy, you might be in better shape.
Repeat the question.
Under canopy or over canopy, if you get it slightly over canopy, you'd be in better shape for effective germination.
We like to see it just going right over the tops of the trees. So, and the way cultural practices are now, most of the groves that we were doing, they're no more than 20 feet high, and it's just a perfect combination.
Any range of barometric pressure, humidity, or evapotranspiration that's known?
Nothing. I mean,
Temperature's the most important.
You definitely want it dry.
Dry?
You don't want to apply in a fog. Water is pretty much the biggest enemy.
yeah.
Moisture.
But the standard.
Because you're using a carrier, how does that affect organic farming?
On our organic blocks, we're using.
But it's okay. It's all
We're using
No.
an organic carrier on the organic
Yeah,
blocks.
we're using like a cornstarch, or I was able to get some. What is that? The grindings of the pollen after the pollen has been collected. Yeah, yeah.
We mill that when it's needed as a carrier. So that gets milled into a finer powder, and that acts as the carrier. The non-organic carrier that we use is it's all natural. I mean, it's not organic. We can't say it's organic, but it's all natural minerals and so forth.
What's it?
The way the first trial was done, the control group, did that go through the same procedure except you didn't have the sutinopollen in it?
The control, no, it just didn't have any, yeah.
Well, when we just did the aggregation of the blower, might have dispersed pollen that was already there, too, right?
You were going to do the third trial. The answer to the question is that we simply didn't apply or didn't walk through just spraying the leaf blower with no anything. So all we did is use that leaf blower only over an area of trees that, well, for instance, now that I'm also doing it for my growers, some of the growers, about 20%, is that we apply it to the whole grove, of course. But during the trial, is plain and simply that I made darn sure that the check block for each of the 4 replications was the wind direction was that way, while the check block is over here. So there was no chance of the Zutano pollen just, the wind changed and turned around and blew it over here, because it does carry quite a ways. When you're doing that leaf blower, you're probably getting as much as 30 rows. But you're still walking through as you're doing it while you're applying it to where you're still continuously applying it over those other 30 rows as you come through them. So you're getting a pretty good opportunity for those flowers that are open at that time. Again, and you really got to use those temperatures. It's very important. And if that Hass flower doesn't open female, I'd say before noon, well then don't apply it that day. If you want absolute maximum efficiency to, and then of course you don't want it too damn hot. So that's the other factor. But if you're doing the applications, you're not going to want to be out there when it's 100 degrees.
Well, if it's wet at all, that female flower is not going to be open. So it's not going to be open until well after noon anyway, because it's cool. It just won't open. So that's
Again, the temperatures do that, plus the humidity.
Yeah, but with respect to my question, there is a possibility that the procedure itself could affect the pollination.
That's why you're going to do that third trial, John. And you come up, please. I take 3 or 4 years if you need.
Well, Bender did some work years ago looking at lure sprays and found that just spraying water in itself, that would only have to do it, that would increase food studies. So that would lend credence to the procedure itself.
In that case, I know that this doesn't have any moisture in it, but it could just be the agitation of the flower. You got the third trial, yeah. But right now it does say that it does work, yeah. Go ahead.
Thanks for the show, by the way. It's a good deal. I've been involved in pollinating for some time and quite pleased with the results. And I have a block, I think, close to yours in Palm Valley. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I have a number of questions regarding avocado tree health. These results, these production results that you have are based on, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 year of testing only.
That's correct.
Okay. And it's obvious that it's been a big success. Nice job. And so what my question relates to is, how does the pollen affect the alternate bearing characteristics of avocado trees? Does it enhance that alternative, that alternating sort of lifestyle that it has? And thirdly...
Well, actually, I'll just take one at a time. But the one statement on that last factor, is it going to alleviate alternate bearing or affect alternate bearing one way or the other, is, I think, anything you can do to increase production overall, and if each year you're actually getting a benefit from what it is that you're doing, that alleviates that great alternate bearing factor that is in there. As, for instance, I use some other techniques on the same basis of trying to, if you know that you have this huge crop on the trees in this given year, what are you going to do to alleviate the alternate bearing that you know is going to happen the next year? And so that, I think, if you've got this big crop and you got that big bloom, maybe you don't even have to apply the Zutano pollen. Just let it go ahead and set a pretty decent crop anyway. And then you're still going to have alternate bearing going into the next year if you've got this good-sized crop. It just is the major factor that's a problem for the worldwide industry of the Hass avocado. And it's the least alternate bearing of all the different varieties. So anything you can do to alleviate that alternate bearing, at the same time increase production, I think is a good thing. So, for instance, some people girdle trees, like a branch, maybe even 2 branches per tree. And if they did it, say, in the fall of a year of an on crop, then maybe they can influence the next year's crop to not be so lousy of a low production year. That those kind of techniques, I think anything you do along that line to alleviate alternate bearing is a good thing.
Based on these heavy crop results that you have, do you have any information regarding how leaf analysis has come out after the year that you've pollinated and produced, what the test results look like, and then how you plan on hopefully circumventing any problems you might have in tree health, or optimal tree health, let's say, for the next year?
One thought about is I lost it. What I was already thinking about.
It's about feeding the trees. It's a simple.
Oh, okay. I went into a second time, and what happened is if you take leaf analysis every year, you want to take leaf analysis every year. And my results have been that alternate year, off year, is if you have a good fertilization program and you have it to where your results don't vary very much, but your results are still within the optimum range that you want for your leaf analysis. And I have not, over a couple of decades of having done this, and always taken leaf analysis, that I have not seen that there's a difference in the next year after you've had an on-crop, and your leaf analysis is greatly different than an off-crop year. It's your fertilizer, and you're taking your leaves, I guess, is the whole thing, rather than flowers or fruit as your factor that you're using to take your tissue sample.
Right. I'm most interested in being able to feed a crop while it's on the tree so I don't lose that interim between the end of the heavy crop and the refoliation of the tree after the crop is off, in other words, the subsequent growth, so that you don't lose them, so that you have a better next year.
That's a good idea.
Thank you. Thanks, Len.
Any other questions? It's been a pleasure.